Hi, I wanted to make this video because I've been thinking. And this time I've been thinking about what happened after I took the decision to face my fears. So the reason I've been thinking about what happened after I took the decision to face my fears is because I wanted to follow up about whether I was pleased with my decision or if I had any regrets. I also wanted to think through what I learnt from the experience. So if you saw my previous video about facing fears, you'll know I talked about the choice between knowing and sticking to your limits or taking a risk and facing your fears. After thinking it through, I decided that as long as I'm not putting myself in danger, I would rather try the option of facing my fears. So I decided that I would be brave, make a plan, and take a risk. So I used an example of being afraid of a social event, and I decided to face that fear and attend the event. So I thought I'd provide an update and let you know how things worked out. So here's the update. So I went to the social event, and I really think that because of the thoughts that I'd worked through ahead of accepting the invitation, I probably felt more curious than dread in the days before the event. So that was already a relief compared to how I would usually feel. I think it was also helpful to have thought about and named my specific fears, because doing that made them sound not quite so bad. It was also helpful to have reminded myself that feeling anxious and having some fears doesn't make me a failure. It makes me human. And if it's okay to have those fears, maybe it's also okay to admit them to other people and to allow myself to need some help. So I went knowing that I had a plan for how I would ask for help if I needed it. And that gave me some extra confidence to take a risk, knowing that I could put my plan into action if I needed to. So what happened? Well, I had to get through the greetings to start with, and that was one of my named fears. And there was a lot of hugging, so I just went along with that because I don't think there's really any choice in those situations. And it was okay, but actually the worst part was that I got covered in perfume, which, if you've seen my video about highly sensitive people, you'll know that is a bit of a challenge for me. Now, I didn't see that problem coming, and actually I'd really like to be able to learn something from it, to try and avoid it happening again when I'm in those kind of greeting situations, and I'm not really thinking clearly enough to be able to remember. So I've kind of decided to put a pin in that one for now. But if anyone can offer any suggestions for avoiding other people's perfume, I'd welcome them. Because it made the event a bit more challenging for me, because I couldn't escape the smell of the perfume on my hair and on my clothes. And I got another dose of it when it was time to leave, and there were more hugs. So the journey home was a bit challenging too, even though I'd left the event at that point. So anyway, that was a bit of a side note really, but and I did my best to ignore the perfume and get on with the event. So it started outdoors, and that was helpful for me. I always feel more relaxed outdoors. And it's funny when things like that seem to work in my favour. I sometimes wonder if someone's looking out for me, like a higher force or something. And I imagine them thinking, I know you'd prefer the greetings to happen outside, so I sorted that out for you. It's a nice thought, whether or not there's any truth in it. So anyway, I was happy to be outdoors, and it wasn't long before I was introduced to some people I hadn't met before. And as that was happening, the thought came to me that in some ways it's actually easier to talk to someone that you don't already know, because there's so much to find out. So almost any question can work as a conversation starter. Whereas if you're speaking to someone that you already know, you can't really start with the basics, so you have to be a bit more creative. So I was quite pleased to be able to think a positive thought about talking to new people. It also helped that everyone I spoke to was very nice, so that was a positive thought too. So after the initial introductions, I managed to mostly talk in groups for the rest of the event, which I find is a much safer space for me. I must admit that I sometimes feel a bit of a coward when I stick to the safer feeling group conversations. But I find one-to-one conversations a bit too intense, so I can't help but try and avoid them. I'm starting to understand that this is probably an autistic trait, and it's probably has something to do with eye contact. So I'm trying to be kinder to myself and to accept that it's part of who I am. Maybe I'll always struggle with one-to-one conversations, and maybe that's okay. I think probably the longer term answer, is honesty about how I'm feeling, and I am making progress there. But the sort of honesty needed to get out of a one-to-one conversation in a social situation with someone you just met, it feels a bit beyond what I'm ready for yet. So sticking with those group conversations felt right this time. I hope that I don't need to hide from those one-to-one conversations forever. I just wish that they could maybe be held side by side, and while we're both looking ahead at something else. So I guess I'm not really being a coward. I'm just trying to keep to what I can manage, which is probably the thing that enables me to be there at all. So after about an hour, the event moved indoors, so I tried to stay calm about that. I do wonder why indoors feels harder for me than outdoors. I don't know if anyone else can relate to that. I know not everyone feels like that, because I've been at plenty of events where people are keen to go inside rather than stay outside. Anyway, I found a seat in a cosy table in the corner, and I had a couple of alcoholic drinks, which was enough to relax me a little bit, so that was nice. And for the rest of the event, I did mostly stay in my cosy corner, but lots of different people came and went from the table, so I was able to have quite a few conversations with different people, and mostly I felt relaxed and enjoyed it. The only time when I started to feel panic bubbling up was towards the end of the event, when someone who'd had a bit too much to drink came over and tried to talk to me and was getting quite close to my face and talking in a way that was hard to get away from. And that kind of made me realise how much impact the style of talking can have on me. If the person speaking to me leaves pauses and gives me an opportunity to speak back, or to maybe excuse myself if I need to, that helps me to stay calm. And if they sort of relentlessly talk at me with no pauses to share the conversation, that causes me to start panicking and wanting to escape. So in that situation, I felt that my plan to ask for 10 minutes of space wasn't going to work, because the event was almost finished and I don't think the person would have listened anyway. So instead I just excused myself to use the bathroom, and I probably came across as quite rude because I had to interrupt them to say it, but they didn't really leave me any choice. I don't imagine that they'll remember that I was rude anyway, if they even noticed. And when I came back, they were nowhere to be seen, so they'd probably found someone else by that point. But when I was reflecting about that afterwards, I realised that I can't control other people, But I can take that as a reminder to myself to make sure that I never talk to someone else like that, and always try to leave pauses in the conversation so that the other person can speak up or can escape if they need to. So although I didn't enjoy that interaction, I did at least learn something from it. So in terms of the event itself, I did have a nice time, and I was glad, to have the chance to catch up with people, mostly in group conversations, who I hadn't seen for a long time. And I learned that some people are easier to talk to than others, and that it's good to put some thought into being a considerate conversation partner and listener, and not just thinking about what questions you'll ask other people. I learned that being talked at makes me panic, so I'll try not to do that to other people. I'd like to come up with a plan for what to do if it happens to me again. Maybe the bathroom tactic I used was already the best one in that circumstance, but if anyone has any other suggestions for that, I'd love to hear them. I was thinking that maybe I could put my hand up and say, sorry, I need to stop you there. But then I don't know what I would say next, other than I need to use the bathroom. I'd like to have a plan, because I know that having a plan helps me to stay calm. But I'll also keep in mind one of my favourite sayings to use when I don't have a plan, and that's, whatever happens, I'll deal with it. So the things I learnt about myself from the event are that I like being part of something bigger, and I enjoyed looking around at the happy faces of people enjoying themselves. I like it when there's entertainment, like speeches or singing or music, and those things are helpful to take the pressure off the conversation and, provide something else to focus on for a while. I don't like being in hot environments indoors that make me feel a bit claustrophobic, but I can cope with it if I have to. I can get triggered by one-to-one conversations, especially with people I don't really know, or people who dominate the conversation and don't leave space for me. I think those are useful things to learn for next time. I've never paid this much attention to the specific circumstances and my reactions before, and it feels helpful to have that extra information about myself, rather than just labelling myself as someone who doesn't like social events. It also feels helpful to remind myself that I'm not rude, I'm not weird, I'm just trying to learn about the things that trigger me, and to work out what I need to do to help myself when they happen. Having that awareness is taking away some of the fear. And I've also realised that although I named all of the specific fears about the various scenarios, I think the overriding fear for me is of being stuck in a situation where I'm in extreme discomfort. And I now know which of those scenarios triggers the strongest reactions in me, so I know what to prioritise. And while it's not my fault that I have that reaction, it is up to me to do something about it. Nobody else can help me if I don't understand and feel able to explain what's happening. And, I'm making progress with that. So, maybe if you find yourself in a similar situation, with a fear that's getting in the way of your life, try digging a bit deeper to understand more clearly what it is that scares you. To see if there's any action that you can take, or any different perspective that you can focus on that's more positive and helpful for you. I think I'd got myself stuck with the label of I'm afraid of social situations, when actually there's a lot more to it than that. I haven't taken away the fear, but I do think that I've shrunk it down a bit. And I plan to carry on paying attention to my reactions, into various situations so that I can carry on learning. You know, I think I've proved to myself that my fears are opportunities for learning more about myself. So in some ways, I almost want to face more of them now to see what else I can find out. I think I'm enjoying being my own science experiment. So I know I was looking at social events in that example, but you know, I'm interested to find out if I can apply the same logic to other fears. You know, and imagine getting to the point where you're not scared of anything. You know, I wonder if that's even possible. I'll have a think about it. So I hope that's been useful to hear about what happened after I faced my fears and what I learned from it. You know, maybe it's inspired you to face a fear of your own. I have no regrets about what I did, so I recommend, you know, giving it a try and seeing what you learn about yourself. So I hope you took something useful from this video, but I think that's all for this time. Thanks for watching and I hope to see you next time.